Hi, I'm Amy. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I've got the absolute pleasure of being joined by one of my favourite authors, Lauren James. So Lauren is the author of lots of fantastic YA books, and she writes thrilling books, books with a touch of horror, but always books that are very grounded in important issues to humanity. So thank you so much for joining us, Lauren.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So I've been reading your books for years. It's really, really lovely to actually speak to you. I know we've met in real life. I've met Lauren as a fan, but now I'm talking to her as an author. It's really exciting. So can you tell us a little bit about your latest book, which I have here? I'm halfway through and it's brilliant, Green Rising.
It's just about kind of showing that climate change isn't something that is hopeless and we're not doomed. It's something that there are solutions for that are achievable, and if we work together we can do it. And a lot of it comes down to like politics and just changing how we think about these topics and making sure that we are not helpless and we're using our voices as individuals. So it was a lot of fun to write, a lot more than I thought it would be when I started out, because it does seem like a very depressing topic, but I had a lot of fun, even though I was doing a lot of research into climate change solutions and economics and all that sort of stuff.
I bet. I was going to ask you about that because a lot of your books have this scientific angle to them, and I know you have a background in science. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in those sorts of subjects?
So I studied chemistry and physics at uni. I went to the University and I did natural sciences to a master's level. And so I've always done kind of courses about atmospheric chemistry and climate change and stuff, but it was something that I only really knew the scientific background on. I definitely didn't know any of the side of it in terms of like capitalism and politics and all that stuff. So I always try to write about science in my stories, especially if I'm writing about something like magic. Like I usually tend to start out with a magical idea, and then my brain, because it works in such a scientific way, I kind of come up with an explanation in the real time. Like, I'll write about reincarnation, but how could that happen with clones? Or I'll write about time travel, but how would you actually make a time travel machine? And in this case it was, oh, I'll have plant magic. But if teenagers did start growing plants, how would that happen scientifically? So yeah, I have a lot of fun in kind of researching real science and trying to find a way to make that accessible to teenage readers. Especially what I like doing is finding scientific theories that have been debunked and like trying to use those ideas. So just because I think it shows really interesting leaps in like understanding and connecting random ideas by humans that when we really have no idea what's going on with something like dark matter, but we come up with these explanations, and even if they're complete nonsense, that's usually the start to a great story. So hopefully my readers might not come away like knowing the science, they don't necessarily understand it, but they will hopefully be inspired to go away and engage with science in a more fun way, because they can see the appeal from how enthusiastic my books are about it.
I think you do that really well, because I'm not a scientific person, and I think the education I had in science wasn't particularly inspiring. It was kind of things written up on a board and you copy them down. So I think that hands-on and kind of real life science has passed me by a little bit. And I love the fact that with your books I do engage with the science and I love it, and I can actually access it, which I'm probably at, a teenage level in science. And I think your readers will get a lot out of that as well. So yeah, you definitely achieve what you set out to do.
Excellent.
So also, as well as science, I think I was thinking back over your books, and I think the first one I read them sort of out of order. I read The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, and I was thinking, how can a book about a girl on her own be, a fun thing to read? And then you've got The Quiet at the End of the World, which is literally about, the end of humanity. And then this book about climate change and the things that could happen to humanity if we don't stop what's really happening. So do you consciously choose quite difficult things to tackle in an uplifting way? And I think the flip side of that is, how do you do it and make it feel uplifting? So I think I'd just be crying by the end to write about climate change.
I'm always looking for like the compelling moments where there's something there that intrigues me, where I can put a character in a situation and see how they'd react in a way I've never read about a character doing before. So for The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, I was like, what would it be like if I was living on my own on a spaceship? Like, I don't even know what kind of person I'd grow up to be if there were no outside influences to a teenage girl who is like, teenage girls are constantly getting told who they have to be and what they have to do, and if you're not getting any of that, who do you grow into? And so in The Quiet at the End of the World, when I was looking at like literally the extinction of the human race, I was looking for the good side of humans. Like, if I don't believe that if we entered an apocalypse situation now where we were like, there's an asteroid coming in 9 months, or humans can no longer have babies, I don't believe we'd like descend into chaos. And I think that humans are intrinsically good, and I think that we would come together as a community and build something lasting out of the last few months we had. So I always try to find the happiness and the joy in the dark situations, and most of all the relatable moments, because I think that is what I come back to sci-fi for, is when you've got a situation where when you read the blurb you're like, there's no way anything about this story could ever be about my life, and you're like hit in the chest with how much you relate to those characters and their struggle, because it's like this allegory for the modern world. And like in The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, that comes down to like internet relationships and catfishing and kind of getting to know someone online in a way that we're doing all the time these days. So yeah, I guess it's something I always want my readers to have fun. Hopefully enjoying that includes some like darkness and fear and jumping in fright along the way, but ultimately it will be positive.
Yeah, and I think I find it sometimes difficult to face up to, the things that really scare me. And when I'm writing, I tend to, I think, skirt around those subjects, and I go for the full, like, kind of silly fun. But I really like the fact that reading your books, it gets me thinking about stuff like climate change and, the end of humanity and stuff. But actually, it doesn't feel scary the way you do it. It does feel like there's hope. So obviously, that's an amazing skill to get a scaredy cat like me to kind of face up to these subjects. It's really good. And I think that's one of the things I really, really do love about your books, definitely.
And I think like I personally, as a reader, I'm always approaching things like, as a reader, what would I want to hear first? And I don't want to read books about the climate change destroying the planet and making everyone miserable. Like, I can imagine that in my head well enough. So I'm very happy to be able to provide the more positive side.
Oh, good. Well, you do it very well. So I was explaining to my husband that I was interviewing you, and he knows that I've been to meet you at events before. And I said that you were like Madonna, because you reinvent the way you write, and that every book feels like it's you, and you use science and you use social media cleverly, and your characters are fantastic. But I feel like you've explored different things, which I don't know that many authors do. I know that a lot of authors change their careers, but The Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker I absolutely loved, and it just hit that paranormal note for me beautifully. And then in this one, you shift and you do some sort of magical realism angle. And I think that's amazing. And hence the Madonna reference, that I think being able to reinvent and yet still feel like you is an amazing skill. So is that something that you've consciously done, that you've tried different things, or is it just where that particular story's taken you?
I've never been compared to Madonna before, so I will happily take that comparison.
It was meant as a big compliment.
I think that as a reader, I read very broadly. Like, I'm not someone who sticks with just reading sci-fi. I read romance and thrillers and crime, and like I read a lot of historical books published in the 20s and non-fiction. Like, I try to stay where I'm going to be out of my comfort zone, and I do get a lot of inspiration from random places, but I guess I always look for the same kinds of things in the stories I'm telling, because like I look for the elements where I'm thinking about humanity and what people are like, and I'm also looking for romance, and like you say, I do a lot of social media stuff because I'm really fascinated by how we use the internet in like relationships these days in a way that no generation has done before. And I think only in like the last 2 or 3 years are we starting to see that reflected in books. For most of the time I was a teenager and into my early 20s, I was like, why am I not seeing what I'm experiencing in any books? Like, I've never heard LiveJournal or Tumblr or Twitter or Instagram mentioned in a book, and yet I've been using them for 5 years. Like, it felt like something I wanted, so I really wanted to put that in. But I guess the big thing is that I always want to stay where I'm not getting bored with what I'm writing, because The Loneliest Girl in the Universe especially was really popular with publishers, and they wanted me to write something really similar again, and that felt like something I couldn't do. I wanted to keep expanding and doing different things, because I think the whole joy for me of being an author is that you get to follow your interests and you're in charge of where you're going creatively, and you just can follow what is making you do the most interesting thought process. So I guess that's why my books all end up in different places in that regard, just because I'm like, I'm gonna write something that's completely different from what I did last time, because I've already read that 50 times. I'd like to move on. I have a lot of respect for the kind of authors who write 10 books in a series and they all feel like one complete work, because I'm the complete opposite of that. I want to try and make things as different as possible.
But I think you do it in a way that fans of your books will still love them, but then get something completely new. And that kind of power that people might not read paranormal books, but then they read about Harry Stoker and they think, actually, that's given me a whole new angle of things I might want to read. So it's
Yeah,
great for you and the reader.
I love being able to say, if you like that, I have 20 book recommendations for you that inspired me. I don't know if you do this, but I make lists of all the books that I took inspiration from, and that I go, oh, I can see where I got this from. This is this idea. And it's really satisfying seeing that list build out and kind of seeing the jigsaw pieces I've taken from different places.
Yeah, I definitely do that. And people sometimes say, oh, that Buffy reference in chapter 3 where you said so and so. And I'm like, oh, that was a Buffy reference, really? And like, a lot of them were intentional, but I think you are kind of, to me, I've consumed so much material that I am the sum total of that in some ways. And I'm not going to, expressly sit and rewrite the Vampire Diaries, but part of my vampire myth is probably drawn from that. And then I'm sure bits from your paranormal one have soaked into my consciousness. So when you're reading my next book, when you edit it, you might think, oh, Harriet had a similar situation.
Excellent.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it, that we all kind of consume so many different forms. I think that's really exciting, and I think that kind of leads us on to social media angle. And I think Lonely Skill was one of the first books I've read that did that had not only little snippets of social media that felt a bit throwaway and just like a reader, using it as a plot device or something, but it feels very seamlessly part of the plot. And somehow you show the wider world through your social media, but also you show the internal nature of your like main characters' lives. And I wondered, can you tell us about how you achieve that and how you kind of blend it into your book so seamlessly?
Yeah, so specifically I do this a lot in Green Rising, where I'm showing this evolution of this plant power from the moment the first teenager like sprouts to when it's kind of ubiquitous and everyone has got it and it's kind of a part of pop culture, and Taylor Swift is writing songs about green fingers and stuff. And I think it's something that we see a lot, where you see information spread online first before you see it in the real world. So in The Quiet at the End of the World, it starts with a pandemic, and the characters are experience this pandemic through social media, where they were reading about it before it gets to their area. And I wrote that before COVID, and then saw it actually happen exactly as I'd written it, which was very weird. So I think I find that really interesting, and particularly how like easy it is to lie or spread misinformation or kind of post something that seems really unbiased, and it's just like you're sharing news, but actually there's a lot going on with motives behind the scenes there. Whether that's a character who is intentionally lying to another character, or if that's a news organization, like I find a lot of ways to use that just because it really interests me. And in terms of research, I guess I just spend a lot of time online. And I like playing around with formatting. I guess it's something that I do when I've got a bit stuck on actual writing. I'll go and play with like using bolds and italics and like putting in tables to make the writing layout differently on a page. So that's something that's really fun to do with like tweets or Instagram posts or whatever. And it gives the reader something different to look at, and that's something I really remember loving as a kid. I used to go and flip through the library books, and any book that had like a Venn diagram in or a PowerPoint, like I would stop and read it, and then you'd be hooked. So it's something that I try to think back to, like what did I like as a teenager, and how can I do that myself now for my teenage readers? So
I do like the fact that it makes it digestible in a different way. And sometimes, particularly if I'm tired or I've been reading a lot and felt a bit burned out by reading, it somehow reinvigorates you. And it's like, oh, I've got a little blog post to read instead, or I've got a little bit of social media. It's just something different for your like kind of reading taste buds. It's great. And And I like the fact that in this one, there are comments by other people about what some of your characters have written as well, which I found fascinating. There was an article that a character had written, and then members of the public having their say. And that just really struck me as to how things have been with COVID, like people jumping on with their take, and some of it is completely scientifically accurate, some is completely scientifically inaccurate. And I thought that was brilliant and gave it that real sense of immediacy and realism as well. So
And I guess I really like as well giving readers a lot of credit in that they shouldn't believe everything I'm telling them, that like my narrators aren't necessarily reliable and that they are probably lying, because you're in their head and people do lie to themselves a lot, and you can't trust them. And if you're getting different like versions of the truth from like their blog posts or whatever, like you have to make your own decision as a reader as to which one of those you trust. And that's something I do in a few of my books. In Their Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker, our main protagonist, is lying to herself a lot about her childhood and how she was raised, and it takes a long time for the reader to understand what's going on there. And then I also have written a novel called An Unauthorized Fan Treatise, which is basically it's just all this social media stuff. It's like a blog from a fangirl talking about her favorite TV show and getting involved in a murder of one of the actors, but it goes very badly wrong and she's lying to you on this blog all the time. And that was so fun, just being like, okay, how can I show the reader that this is a lie without actually saying that it's a lie, and how can I get them to be as suspicious of the main character as I want them to be without making it too obvious. So that was a lot of fun to play around with.
yeah, I bet it was. And that takes us beautifully on to my next question about Harriet Stoker, because I think I mentioned to you that it's one of my favourites of your books because the paranormal element just speaks to me. And I love how dark it is that the book starts with your main character, plummeting to her death. And then a lot of the characters in the book are ghosts. I just thought that was so creative. So I was wondering, is it writing about paranormal something you set out to do when you set out to write that book? And is it a subject that you would ever return to?
So I was a huge fan of like basically the TV shows about teenagers with powers, but they use them to do terrible things, like Misfits and Being Human. I loved those kind of like gang of misfit shows. So I really wanted to make a gang of teenagers with powers. That was like the starting point for this. And I started looking at ghosts because I was reading about ghost legends and how they vary a lot around the world based on the cultures. Like every culture has a ghost myth, but what the ghosts can do and what their powers are is completely different. And so all of the powers in the book are kind of inspired by the heritage of those characters and who they are.
Oh.
And so it started out just as a way to get magical powers in there, and then it expanded into that because I love like ghostly creepy stuff, and I really like bringing like the history into that, of how if you've got backstory for a character and they're like 1,000 years old, like what is that going to do when they're in the modern day, and how can you make that really interesting, and what is your character's main motivations going to be if their life is over and they can't leave the building they're in. It's kind of a similar idea to The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, where it's like we're trapped together in this small space. Let's watch each other tear each other apart. Like how can you get all those dynamics into play? And I would love to do something else with ghosts. I'm writing a book at the minute that I think is going to be an adult book rather than YA. Ooh, but that's about vampires, like pseudo vampires. So I'm doing some kind of paranormal stuff in there as well. But I'd love to know what the appeal of the paranormal is to you.
I don't know whether it's because I grew up reading point horror, and like I read Interview with the Vampire far too young and watched Buffy probably at the perfect age. I think I was about 12 when it came out. So for some reason I've always just been attracted to this idea of that little step beyond human, and that feeling that we don't think vampires are real, but I don't. But what could they be? And you might not believe in ghosts, but I bet a lot of people feel that they've had that moment where they've questioned it. And I find that really interesting, that there's this whole world that some people believe in, some people don't. And that's why I set my book in New Orleans, because obviously there's the huge vampire connection with Interview with the Vampire. But a lot of the people there tell you stories that the paranormal is very much part of their lives. So they say things like they saw a ghost on the trolley as they traveled through New Orleans, or, their grandmother still talks to them and she died however many years ago. And I find that fascinating, that depending on the culture or the personal belief, you can just have this whole range from completely no belief to uncertain to, yeah, it definitely all exists. So yeah, that's a really long answer to say I like it a lot. Yeah, I think there's a lot of scope for talking about humanity, and yeah, there's just so many different angles you can take. I certainly think that when I've done with vampires, I will probably explore some other paranormal subjects.
Excellent. I really want you to do ghosts and werewolves and all sorts. I think that
Thank
would be
you.
amazing.
Yeah, same when you said vampires, I was like, oh yes, please. When can I read it? But yeah, so I'm just taking my questions because I feel like I've just taken us off on a complete tangent. So I'm interested, you mentioned a little bit about your writing process, and I was wondering, how do you tend to approach a book from that very first seed of an idea? How does it turn into the book that we get at the end of the day?
So it varies from project to project, but I'm writing my 10th or 11th novel now.
Wow.
It's like so many that I've actually lost count. And usually I start about 2 years before they're going to be released. And that will start with discussions with my agent and my editor, where I'll write out a pitch and then they'll give feedback, and I'll usually rewrite it completely. Like there'll be almost no connection to the original pitch by the time I'm done with it. So I like being able to like really play around with plots and structure, and when there's nothing keeping me attached to it particularly because I haven't written anything down yet. And then I'll have like a complete and approved outline in place, usually a year before I have to start writing. So then I have a year where I'm like, I know I'm going to be working on it, and I can be making notes and compiling ideas, and I have like a bullet point list of everything that I want to add in when I get to it, which I find is really important time for me. If you said to me like today, like, Lauren, I want you to write a book about Harry Potter and you need to deliver it in 6 weeks to be published as a spin-off, I'd be like, I couldn't. I need like 2 years to think about it, because my brain is not inventive enough at coming up with plots that fast. Like it needs to incubate. But then when I've had that year of thinking time, I will take those notes. And I my last book I wrote in, I think, 6 weeks, because it was just going through my outline and my list of ideas and putting them in place. And obviously you get stuck and things don't turn out how you expect, but I've been living in the world for so long at that point, it's quite a fast process. And I think as well, a big thing now is that I know I can do it. I at first I definitely would like freak out halfway through and be like, this is impossible, I'm never going to finish this, and spend 3 months panicking and then go back to it and be like, oh, that was easy. Whereas now when I get stuck, I'm like, I can definitely fix this. I just need to talk it out and spend a few days thinking about it really hard, and I will find the problem.
How did you
So
find that after your first book? I'm interested. So now obviously you've got 10 or 11 behind you and you know you can do it. Did you have that feeling after being a debut of, can I do this? Or did you feel that that was enough to cement you as an author?
definitely it didn't happen that fast. I think so before my debut novel came out, I'd written The Loneliest Girl in the Universe and The Last Beginning. So I'd written 3 novels. And I think that until your first book goes out and you know how it's going to be judged, you don't really feel like a real author, even if you've written a few books, just because you're like, well, I like this and maybe 1 or 2 other people like this if you've got an agent and an editor, but apart from that, like nobody's read it. You don't know if it will be received well, or even like you can't really picture your own book in your head if it doesn't have a cover. Like you have no idea of a concept of yourself as a brand. So I think it was probably only when I was starting working on The Quiet at the End of the World, so my 4th book, that I felt like I could do it and I knew what the end result was going to be like, because I had the picture in my head from The Next Together, my first book. So yeah, it took a few books. How about you? Do you feel like you can confidently write a novel and know you'll be able to get to the end yet?
Yeah, so I do. And I think because basically the way this second book came about was that the first one come out and been well received, so my publisher said, right, we want the second one. And quite often you would have already written that book, wouldn't you? If I'd got, say, a 2 or 3 book deal, my publisher would have probably get me to write the first book a year before that one came out, and then the second one would have been in the bag by the time the first one came out. So I kind of had to really quickly get it on paper, so I didn't have time to think, is this rubbish, are people going to hate it? Because I just knew that I'd got 4 months and I had to get it done. But there is that still little seed of, I hope people like it, so I just go like the first one, and what if Lauren edits this one and goes, oh, the twist's not as good? So yeah, I think I do feel more confident having had the first book well received, but there is still that little. I know I've done it again in that I've drafted it, but can I refine it and polish it and make it as good as the first book? I think as I think it is anyway. Yeah, there's still that little bit of doubt. So it is reassuring to know actually that you did have that same doubt, because I think you sometimes wonder if everybody else thinks they've got this author thing sorted, and you're the only one who hasn't.
I think this probably isn't very encouraging for aspiring writers to hear, but editing I find is actually harder than drafting. Like I am always terrified when I start editing a book, and that's the bit I think I'm never going to pull off. Like I'm going to rip it apart and then never find a way to get it back reassembled. So yeah, but it is possible. You
And you
can
do
do
it brilliantly, Lauren. You've done it a lot of times amazingly well. I'm the other way around. I think I find the blank page quite scary. And with book two, it was a bit different because I knew I wanted to write this as a trilogy, and I'd got that arc in my head. And while I was writing book one and doing the promo, I think book two was becoming more and more real. So it's a good job I've got the chance to write it, because it was all there waiting for me. I don't know how I'll feel when I get to a completely new world. I think the blank page will be terrifying, but I do like editing, but I do that moment, like you said, of knowing that you've got to change one huge thread. And if you pull it too hard, the whole thing could fall apart. It is definitely a real worry. And I keep so many versions when that happens. And I flag them, pre this big thing I'm going to change, just in case the big change goes horribly wrong and I ruin it.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I'm always looking through old emails and folders to try and find the version that I know there's a sentence in that I really need,
Yeah.
and I can never find it.
The amount of times I've done that, yeah. I really like the way I worded this before I deleted it. Yeah. So in terms of editing then, how do you approach that? Because it feels like your approach to drafting is very scientific and organized, and not all like my scraps of post-its and big sprawling messes. Like, is your editing approach just as organized as your drafting?
I really don't think so. It feels very chaotic to me. I tend to use a lot of tracked changes and comments to myself. So one thing that I've started doing in the last few books that's really changed how I edit is that, because I do a lot of twists and I build in like places where I'm lying to the reader and then reveal the lie, I go through and I'll mark up the places where those things happen,
Oh,
because so many times I've like been editing out of order and I've discussed something and then realized that I hadn't revealed that twist for another 100 pages. So I keep markers to myself of when things happen so that I can flick between the comments really easily within a big document and like move things around, and keep that structure within my head. I think probably there's like fancy writing programs that make that easier, but I just use Microsoft Word. I'm not willing to learn a new program yet. And I think I don't tend to like print it out or anything. I do it all digitally, and I just make a lot of bullet point lists from my editorial notes, and then mark those up throughout the document wherever I'm going to use them, and then do them one at a time. So yeah, it feels very chaotic, but it somehow works in the end.
one thing I've done this time, which is similar, I do the exact same writing comments to myself. I write things in capital letters in highlighting, like, haven't written this scene yet, do it later type thing. But this time I've tried something new where I've written a synopsis on a spreadsheet, which I always do chapter by chapter. But this time I've put the main twists and big events, I've kind of flagged them up on that spreadsheet. So I'm hoping that, because I've done the same as you, I've kind of had a reveal of something that I've realised I've not even planted the seeds of anywhere, but the seeds kind of come after the reveal. So I thought this time, at least if I support, this is where the reveal is, so these are going to have to be the steps to get there. So I'll let you know if that works, because it feels more organized than anything I've ever done. And I'm not typically a spreadsheet mind. I'm more of a kind of chaotic, as you can see from the room behind me, this room is my mind. And this is kind of how my drafting and plotting process goes, just a big splodge of creativity. So I don't know if the spreadsheet approach will work, but I will let you know.
I'm excited to see that. That sounds really good.
This is another thing that I've obviously spoken to you a few times, and I've read all of your books, but I don't know, how did you get your first book published? So what was that journey like?
So I was writing during the really big YA boom in around 2013. 2012, I think I got my agent, and that was like when YA was really kicking off, and there were all the movies, and Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell was really big, and the John Green Fault in Our Stars was getting really big, so publishers were buying up a lot of YA. So I think I got really lucky in that I know my agent made a lot of deals for YA that year, like a huge amount, because they were actively looking for them. Whereas I think now we're in a more of a middle grade boom, where they're buying up more middle grade. But yeah, so I wrote my first book when I started when I was 16, and I finished the first draft when I was 19.
Oh, really?
I then spent a couple of months editing, and then Harper Voyager were doing a call for open submissions, and I just saw it online. Like, I wasn't planning to submit to anywhere yet, because I was at uni, so I was like, I'll wait another 6 months until the summer holidays, and then I'll take another look and see what I think of it. But then I saw this call for open submissions of books, and they were saying that it was the first time in 10 years HarperCollins had done an open submission, and it was really hyped up. So I was like, okay, I'll just send it and see what happens. So I like edited up my manuscript and made it a lot neater, and like I didn't have much time at that point because I was on a year abroad in America, so it was really something that I did like in my dorm room between activities really quickly. And when I'd done that for the competition, which by the way, I didn't get into, nothing happened with the competition, but because I had done the work of editing it, I just sent it off to some agents. I found a list of like A to Z agents in the UK, and I started at the bottom of the list because I thought the agents with the surnames like ZYX would receive less emails. So I got to Claire Wilson, which was I think the 6th agent that I emailed, and she replied and she said she really liked it. So she gave me a lot of notes, and I spent maybe a year with her editing it just one-on-one. And then in my final year of uni, when I was 21, she sent it out, and we got 2 offers within 2 weeks from publishers. So I got very lucky. I got to choose between them. And like I said, I think if I was submitting that same book now, it would have had a very different response, because this was like a real YA boom. But I've been very lucky to stay with Walker and the same editors ever since for all of my books, and I've got more under contract with them, so I know that I'm going to have the same team in place, which has been really nice. I think it's one of the reasons why I feel like I can do so many different kinds of things with my books, because I'm very secure in having an editor who's basically said whatever you want to write we'll publish. So I can kind of be a bit more risky with it. And yeah, it's been really nice having that continuity and seeing the YA industry change a lot over the last, I think, 5 or 6 years. It's crazy that it's been that long, but it's completely changed and it's grown bigger, and there's so much more diversity and such a variety of stuff being published now. It's brilliant. And vampires are back, which is the big thing I'm excited about as a vampire fan.
Thank goodness they are.
There were no vampire books that were being published. Nobody wanted to read about vampires 5 or 6 years ago. Everyone was bored of Twilight. So the fact that they're back now is amazing to me.
Honestly, I'm so relieved, because I wrote a vampire book when I was at uni. I started it, and I thought when I finish uni, I'm going to really concentrate and get this done. So when I turned 21, I was writing this book, and then this book called Twilight came out, and I was like, my vampire book's never going to get off the ground. And literally all the agents thought, no vampires, please, we've had enough. So that kind of, I thought then I'm not going to be able to do vampires ever. So I've probably for 15 years had this book like waiting to be written in me, even though I didn't know at the time. So yeah, I'm really happy. I did find out though, the day I got my agent, I found out that The Beautiful by Renee Hardy was coming out, and I thought, oh no, another New Orleans vampire book. But I think the great thing is with the variety that's out there now, you can have 2 books that, from the pitch, New Orleans vampires sounds similar, but if you dig any deeper, you realize they're a totally different book. And I love that with vampires. I just want more and more of them.
Yeah, you can never have too many vampire books or vampire TV shows. Like, I will consume them all, like, because I know that there's things in there that I'll like, so I'm going in there like expecting certain things and getting rewarded with them, and I'm going to be happy. So yeah, I think that's the great thing about reading, that writers worry about a lot, that they're writing similar books, and then readers that's what they want.
Yeah, exactly. So while we're on the subject of vampires, you can see from my room probably the Buffy shelf kind of gives it away. Do you have a favorite vampire thing, like TV show or movie? Or
the thing I'm obsessed with at the minute is What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show, which is on series 3, and it is so good. It's very genre savvy in that it knows all of the tropes and it makes fun of them, and then actually expands on the world building in really interesting ways. So one of the things it does that I love, it has this concept of energy vampires, which they don't drink blood, they consume energy, and they do that by making people really bored. And then like as they go into like a boredom coma, listening to them talk or drone on about something, they take all their energy, and they're like the most powerful type of vampire, like like they can take energy from normal vampires and leave them in a coma as well. So that's like a really cool concept that I love, and I hope they develop more with the world of that. And but that's like my big favorite at the minute. But I'm super excited for the new TV show with Interview with a Vampire.
Yes, me too.
And another paranormal one that I really like is the BBC show Ghosts, which is like I think it's on series 3 as well. So it's about two people who move into this very old house, and they find out that it's full of ghosts from all different eras, and they're basically like immortal idiots, and they just get into loads of trouble, and it's really funny and heartwarming. And I really just like when like the fact that you can live forever just means that you lose all sense of like impulse to do anything useful with your life and you just want to cause as much trouble as possible and be like a killer but also a complete idiot. Like that's my vibe, so anything with that in.
Yeah, I like the Lost Boys for that. I just like the fact that those vampires just want to kind of wear leather and hang out and like have, you know, bonfires on the beach and stuff. Like I just think that that's really fun too. I haven't actually seen What We Do in the Shadows. People keep saying that I need to watch it, and I promise that I will, and then instantly don't do it. So maybe I need to just take the plunge and get into that.
The episodes are only like 20 minutes as well, so you can catch up very quickly. It's all on BBC iPlayer.
Oh, brilliant. I'm going to do it, Lauren. I've now committed myself like on YouTube. I've said I'm going to do it, therefore it will happen. It's brilliant.
I'm going to be leaving you edit notes, like if you refer to episode 3.
Yeah, you will not understand this edit note until you watch the episode.
Homework.
Yeah, do it. So we've come to the end of our questions. Just the last one is, can you recommend anything apart from watching What We Do in the Shadows? Is there anything you can recommend for us to read for this spooky time of year?
Yes, so I went back to my list of the things that I made that inspired The Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker, and particularly these were like things that had the tone that I wanted to get, where it's really dark and you know that something's going on that you don't understand yet, and it's going to be revealed, and you just have to be patient. So We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson is one of my ultimate favorites, where it's about a girl who lives in a big house with her sister, and all of her family has died and something happened and you don't know why, and everyone in the village hates them for some reason to do with all these deaths, and it's just really creepy and witchy and excellent. I also really like Monsters by Emerald Fennell. Emerald Fennell is now absolutely massive. She wrote Promising Young Women, and she was in The Crown, and like, but before that she was in the UK YA community, and she wrote a couple of middle grade books, including one called Monsters, which is written in the style of like a Enid Blyton like going on holiday to the English beach story, but it's about a girl who is like a serial killer, and she's completely crazy, and she goes off and like discovers these bodies on this beach, but it's written in the style of Enid Blyton, so it's amazing.
That sounds it.
And then another one that I really like, which is an adult one, is The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, which is about a group of kids who are raised by a god who's like a very torturous, evil god, and they all are very powerful, and they become very tormented, traumatized adults with terrible powers, and they live in this giant library, and it's so good. And then another one which is kind of creepy in more of a gross way, rather than that the characters are evil, is Pure by Andrew Miller, which is set in France, in Paris, when they realized that because of the plague they had filled the city with graveyards full of rotting bodies, and there were literally like millions of corpses, just making the whole graveyard collapse in the very center of Paris. So it's about the guy who was given the job of getting rid of all of the corpses, and it's absolutely disgusting. If you ever need help writing a scene where you have to write about a really disgusting gross body or anything, read Pure. And it's just about like the Paris catacombs and skeletons, and like how disgusting humanity and bodies are, which is one that's always stuck with me, and I read it a long time ago. So yeah.
What a brilliant range. I haven't read any of them. I do have Monsters, so I probably need to get to that, because that sounds like exactly my kind of thing.
It's really good.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. That's a great note to end on. Some brilliant books for people to read during the scary season. Thank you. I always love listening to you speak, and it's been great talking to you about your books. So we're using this interview as part of Killer YA-Con, which is an event I've put together with a few authors called Kat Ellis, Naomi Gibson, and Holly Race, and we'll be doing lots of events, panels and individual chats like I've done with Lauren. So if you want to watch more, you can check them out. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Bye.